Nations are finally waking up to the dangers of global poverty. For years they wouldn't listen, not even to the warnings of the head of the World Bank.
It's an issue of people coming in with a bomb or poison. Terrorism is something that is a new form of conflict, which can affect us wherever we are.
Now, with the world in crisis, the issue of poverty has acquired a new urgency. With the old certainties gone, will the big powers finally act on the warnings of the prophets of doom? Mary Ajikum is sitting on gold, but she isn't benefiting from it. She lives in the resettled village of New Atuabu in the west of Ghana. She breaks stones for 12 hours a day.
Life is really hard for us. I can hardly look after the kids. I can't afford to feed them, let alone clothe them. Yesterday I didn't have enough to buy them food when I left for work. They went without until I returned in the evening. That makes me really sad.
The World Bank called Ghana the model pupil, but after 20 years of economic fundamentalism, what do the people have to show for it? And if it's failed here, what chances elsewhere? Mary's family lived quite well. They had a farm. Then a mining company turned up and took away their land.
One day the white men came. They said they needed to count up the total number of people in the village. We didn't understand at first. Later it was explained that the government had given them the land, so we had to move out and leave the land for them. If we refused to leave peacefully, they would send in the military to force us out.
It's a familiar story. 2/3 of land in this region has been sold to multinationals. Compensation is minimal. In a good week, Mary and her children earn £2. The same policies which drove her off her land have put schooling and healthcare beyond her means. Even the most basic commodity of all comes with a price tag.
We have to buy our water. The price of a plastic container fluctuates. When I don't have enough money, we buy it on credit and pay for it after I've earned enough from work. We also pay for using the toilet. Sometimes when I can't afford it, I beg the attendants to allow me to use it without charge. When I feel I've had too many free goes, I go into the bush.
The policy is called full cost recovery. It's part of the conditions that comes with loans from the World Bank and the IMF. From the comfort of the capital, Accra, the battle for the essentials of life doesn't seem quite so acute. How much do you travel in this country?
Well, for a certain amount.
How many ordinary people? People who aren't government ministers and economic advisors do you talk to?
Plenty.
You get out to the villages, do you? Do you talk to these people who now have to pay for their water, who have to pay to go to the loo, who don't get compensated for being relocated?
I know you're trying to get me angry. I'm not going to get angry, okay? I'm going to stay calm because you're trying to provoke me and
I'm
suggest...
not trying to do any... I am
You're
simply
trying to suggest that what I do
case.
is spend my time in ivory tower and I have no idea what's going on in the countryside. That is not true. I don't have any knowledge of villagers that are charging, whoever it is, who is charging people to go to the toilet? I mean, I have no idea what you're talking about there. What I have seen...
The village of New Atuabu.
Okay, and who is charging whom?
The poor are being charged for all the essentials of living. Many Ghanaians never had access to clean water. The state-run water company was a mess. That's not in dispute. Azara Issa doesn't have the money to pay for clean water. Under the plans of the IMF and the World Bank, local communities have to finance their own supplies. Their next step is privatization of the water supply, and to get the state corporation fit for outside investment, prices have doubled. Twice a day, Azara goes to a dam a few hundred yards from her village to collect water. It's infested with guinea worm. She knows the dangers, but she has little choice.
Our inability to afford the money is the reason why we always come to fetch this water. The money that could be used to pay for the borehole water is used to buy food like koku for our breakfast, since we can't afford both at the same time. For us, it is better to spend the money on food or other things and fetch water free of charge from the dam, because having good water without food is useless.
Full cost recovery, or cost sharing, or cash and carry. There are many names for the policy of making people pay for all the essentials. This model is being applied throughout the developing world. Azara scrapes together some money collecting groundnuts. Her limited income means she has to make tough choices between having food or clean water.
We cover the bucket with the net before we sieve the water to remove the disease that is in it. But if we are at home in the house, after the sieving we put it on the fire and allow it to boil for some time, so that the other diseases and the scent in the water will be killed. The disease that's in the water comes from ticks. There are also other organisms which can attach themselves to the human body and suck your blood. Once they've attached themselves to your body, before you realize they're there, they've already sucked some of your blood.
She would use clean water if she could. It's not out of ignorance that she's doing this.
A
borehole in the centre of this village. Cost recovery in action. The World Bank has decreed that countries in debt shouldn't waste money on basic services like water. Here it's a form of self-service. You bring your bucket, you pay your money. One rule for the poor, another for the rich. In America, the government pours tens of millions of dollars into the public water system to keep it going. In the villages, fights tend to break out. Here a woman is begging for clean water from her neighbours because she can't afford to pay. This causes divisions within the community. "10 hours to the north of Accra, to the poorest part of the country. This area was Ghana's rice bowl. It provided ample work and it provided ample food for the people, another of life's essentials. The World Bank's policies changed all that. In the village of Pembe, the people are summoned. Festivities are declared. On one level, things haven't changed. Tribal elders have gathered to meet us. The dancing and the singing is in our honour. They may have lost their livelihoods, but the old traditions for greeting visitors are maintained. Formalities are strictly observed.
Chief, hello, very nice to meet you. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
The chief is holding court, but there's a change in the air. There's a new political awareness which is challenging the inequalities of the economic order.
You used to farm rice yourself. You used to have, I'm told, 1,000 acres in the Katanga Valley?
Yes, I used to be about one of the biggest rice farmers in the north. But because of change of policy, I folded up. And I used to employ so many people on the farm here in the village at the Katanga Valley.
What's happened to the local rice industry? Do you make your own rice anymore? What's happened to your huge farms that you used to have?
the local rice industry has virtually collapsed. Because government was subsidizing fertilizer, they were subsidizing seed, machinery were available, and that gave employment to our youth here. Everybody, there was almost full employment in this area. Even the young girls, even weekends, students used to go and work on the farms for something that they could take to school during the week. But with the collapse of the rice industry, there's nothing for anybody to depend on, apart from moving to the cities down south to go and look for something that even is non-existent. Some of them come here, either virtually dead or half dead. Because they go there, they are hungry, they can't get good jobs, come back with malaria, with other diseases. Now we have to go and buy. Go and buy a half bag of rice, 50 kilos. Go and buy that one for 300,000. The MF policy has been very negative. It has affected this area terribly. Our standard of living has fallen very, very, very low. So when they say that they give figures that Ghana has done this, Ghana, well, we don't see the effect on our people.
Ghana now spends $100 million a year importing rice from places like America. Two policies rolled into one: remove subsidies and remove trade barriers. The free market in its purest form. It's a kind of economic Darwinism, natural selection, survival of the fittest. Ghana was told to concentrate on two basic commodities for export, gold and cocoa beans, and let the rest wither away. A variation on a theme from colonial times.
Why should a tropical, semi-tropical, semi-arid country be growing rice?
So it shouldn't be.
I doubt very much if Ghana should be even contemplating being self-sufficient in rice. Why would you want to do that when you've got Thailand and Vietnam with all of their natural advantages producing rice at a price dramatically lower than Ghana could ever possibly contemplate?
No, I'm talking about America, the world's greatest economic superpower that subsidizes its own agriculture to the tune of $20 billion a year. You don't let the locals subsidize their own domestic agriculture. Isn't there something wrong there?
There's something wrong in American policy on agriculture.
I'm talking about here.
No, I don't think so. You think Ghana can out-subsidize America? Let me give you a number that is shocking but true. Subsidies in the OECD countries on agriculture exceed the income of Africa. You cannot out-subsidize those countries.
This game of natural selection is rigged. Poor countries are forced to apply the rules, the rich are not. For the people of the International Monetary Fund, the economists who deal with the numbers and the theories, these problems are a little unsettling.
I can only say that the two institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, are on record. They are on record asking the EU, the US and other major countries to remove obstacles to exports from developing countries. I think the issue is really, you can say, but at the end of the day, these countries have to implement their own domestic policies.
So for as long as this situation exists, for as long as this situation continues, you accept that the rules are unfair?
No, the rules are not unfair. The rules are fair, but countries have to implement them.
So the situation is unfair?
The situation is unfair, but the rules are fair. Free trade is, I mean, at least a move towards free trade is a fair rule. But whether it is implemented or not is another question, and the situation becomes unfair.
And those who are the object of this unfairness are the weakest?
That's again the unfair situation, or the unfortunate situation.
It's so unfortunate, no one's taking responsibility. The institutions blame the governments for not practicing what they preach. The governments now blame the institutions for preaching the wrong thing. The rice fields lie fallow in the Katanga Valley. No work, no jobs, the essentials of life denied. It's a similar story in other countries. A new generation of activists is emerging. Yao Graham heads Third World Network. He's based in Ghana, but he travels further afield, monitoring the effects of World Bank policies.
If you work it through in terms of the benefits, that very small input from the central government worked its way through in some very important ways in creating dynamism in the local economy, stopping the drift of young people from countryside to the towns looking for jobs where there is none, and also really just maintaining the dignity of people in terms of the ability to do things and support themselves. Of course, they stay in the villages, engage in subsistence agriculture, unable to afford the growing demands to pay for basic social services like education, like health, like water. So we get this vicious circle.
The loans came with conditions: cut public spending, open up markets, remove subsidies, charge for the essentials of life. And the loans brought debt, mountains of it. Last year, Ghana spent less than 4% of its budget on health. 7 times more money went to repaying interest on debt. The main hospital in Tarkwa, in the heart of the mining region, it now has to be self-financing. That means making the patients pick up the tab.
At the moment, people have to pay for the cost of health care.
And for example, this lady, do you know, did she have to pay?
She will have to pay for the admission fee.
How much did she have to pay for her admission?
She has not been discharged. If she's discharged, then we do the assessment and she will have to pay.
Right, so on discharging she has to pay?
Yes.
And what about the other patients here? Is that the same for them?
Yes.
Or what about the drugs? Who pays for the drugs?
They pay for the drugs.
They pay for the drugs.
Cash and carry.
Cash and carry.
Yes.
You call it cash and carry.
So,
describe what is cash and carry?
Yeah, the cash and carry system has been the policy of the Ministry of Health. Over the years, there has been problem with financing of the Ministry of Healthcare system. And therefore, it was thought wise to introduce what we call cost sharing. Then, now over time, it has been realized that the government alone cannot take care of the health needs of the people, and therefore individuals who need care have to come and pay.
Thanks to cash and carry, Betty Cramper is a prisoner in this hospital. She's just given birth to twins. One died on delivery. She can't give the doctors the cash. Her husband's out of work, her parents are dead. Her jailers are as ashamed as she is at having to make her stay. But user fees have to be collected to keep the hospital going.
Could you just tell me, you have been discharged and you are staying until your in-laws can produce the money, is that correct?
I'd like to go home, but we can't pay the bill.
How long have you been in this hospital?
I was discharged 5 days ago, but my husband is looking for a loan to pay the hospital fees and hasn't been able to find it. He's gone to see if his uncle can lend him the money.
What was it like before cash and carry?
I'll tell you one thing. When I was growing up, I never paid for any medical services, and I had several times been admitted to the teaching hospitals. It was good then. Now, it's like, if you can't afford, then you are almost condemned.
Condemned by the debt mountain while living on a mountain of gold.
So it seems to me, just having travelled around a bit in this area, that you have a strange situation in which you have the mining companies making huge profits. Tarkwa should be a rich area. You are sitting on all this gold. And here you have people who are detained here because they can't pay their medical fees. Why?
Yes, maybe if you had a chance to travel around the country, you would notice that most of the mining areas have similar problems. All the gold is taken out, but the people don't see the effects, the returns directly.
In colonial times, this was called the Gold Coast. It's always brought a rich seam of profits for foreigners, but the wealth has never poured down to the people. Ghana was the first sub-Saharan country to go it alone. The main industries like gold were nationalized. But by the early 80s, the economy had collapsed. Corruption was rife. Hopes were dashed. The IMF and World Bank, the White Knights, rode in with a plan: structural adjustment. Their message was simple: go for exports, bring back the foreigners to run things, and the road to prosperity would be paved with gold. First came privatization, then the incentives, virtual tax holidays of up to 10 years, offshore havens for most of the profits, rules on the environment kept to a minimum. These investor-friendly policies served as a model across the developing world. The village of Dumasi. For the past 9 years, the locals have had to live within a stone's throw of an open-cast pit. It's taken them a while, but now they're fighting back.
So this was your farm, yeah?
Yeah, this is my farm. You see, the mining activities has degraded all the land.
And what did you used to grow?
I used to grow cocoa, cassava, plantain, oil palm, and cash crops. So many cash crops.
And now?
All is spoiled.
You don't farm anything now?
Anything. You see, the whole farm is covered with their waste material. Most of the waste has just pushed to the cash crops. So we don't get anything. See, we can't get money to afford to put our children into schooling.
It's a very short distance, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, it's 100 meters. Yeah. So the distance from the town to the pit is the distance is too short. You see, we have been meetings with the company. Only they want their gold to go. They don't think of our human life.
And tell me, when they decided to dig here, to excavate here,
yeah,
what did they do? They came to the village.
Yeah.
And did they give you any notice? Did they tell you what was happening, or did they just say?
Okay, they came. They came 9 years ago. 9 years. This company is really using pressure. They came and say we won't allow them to operate. Then the government allowed them. They brought in military and police personnel to do their mining activities. So even when you are going to your farming lands, to be brutal.
Allegations like these have been brought to a series of meetings protesting at the activities of mining companies. People from neighbouring villages have been mobilised.
They said we had a choice between relocation and resettlement. On the 6th of February, they brought 36 policemen with tear gas to force us out. They said we had been paid the value of our houses, so we should leave. We refused until we had been paid the value of our lands. They beat us, then pulled down our houses, ruining everything we owned.
For the people of Chicheve, it's an impossible choice. Give up your land, leave your home, and take the meagre compensation. But that's it, nothing to live on once the money runs out. Or stay put and face the consequences.
They also completely demolished all our schools. The nearest school to our settlement is now 10 kilometers away, and the children can't walk that far every day, so they stay at home without any education. Life has become very hard for us. If you came to our village now, you would find us living under sheds. But since you at Dumasi have the support of your chief, I'm sure everything will work out well.
The mining companies are keeping a watchful eye on the growing protest movement.
As you probably understand, you're trespassing, but I would rather this dismiss the scene if you like, okay? Yeah. So doors open down there for the BBC people.
Good. We'll come down and see you shortly.
I'm very happy to be here today in Dumasi and actually experience a mine executive come here, try to speak. His mouth was shaking like this, you know, and then off he went. I mean, it just shows that the power of organized people is extremely important in any struggle that we are engaged in. You see, because we're in a country where we have had a transition to free politics. Now, I say you can say anything you like. But you see, you can say anything you like, but if you don't have strength, nobody will listen to you.
They are being forced to listen now, and to answer for their actions. The balance of power is shifting. A Human Rights Commission upheld the villagers' complaints. But still the companies insist their local activities are a minor inconvenience.
The impact of a mine has both good and bad effects. It has what should be no more than nuisance value. If a mine is causing the ailments you alluded to, we definitely, obviously we shouldn't be doing it. That would be, totally unreasonable. But if the mine, but we do accept that the mine does cause some nuisance value in terms of it is physically there, etc., etc.
Would you quite happily live within 100 metres of that pit when the blasting takes place?
I don't, to throw up the distance issue is one erroneous because I say there's the issue of who moved who. But apart from that, we have, even where the nearest house is, we have done our monitoring in the presence of the community, and they have agreed with us that blasting should continue because it wasn't an issue. So therefore, to answer the question is yes, I'll be very happy to live there. I mean, I agree, as we said, it's not, you do hear it, but it's a nuisance factor, it's not a health factor or any other factor.
It was easy to fob off the villagers until they started enlisting the help of outside activists.
People of Odumasi came to us last 2 years with their complaints. We have made interventions at the governmental level, at the local authority level, and we have invited many people to investigate their problems. Problems of pollution, air and water pollution, problems of skin diseases, problems of children urinating blood, problems of communities not having fair and adequate compensations, problems of resettlement.
Each village has its own story, but they form a common thread. It's not the companies that are seen as the main culprits now. It's the foreign institutions which impose the rules. Ghanaians no longer look to concerned outsiders to lobby for them.
I personally was going to be one of the many hundreds of thousands of people who would have been marching on the IMF and World Bank headquarters in Washington. But as you all know, the United States of America is in mourning, because I don't think anybody in the world has not heard of the terrible and tragic events that took place. The bombing of the World Trade Center and also of the Pentagon. And anybody who has seen those images on TV, your stomach goes like that. And properly everybody has condemned this, as a senseless way of expressing whatever protest people want to express. But we are living in a world where so many people are now feeling so taken for granted, not having power, that unless the big powers become more and more sensitive to the demands of the weaker countries, all of us are endangered. So even as we condemn what happened in America, all of us also have a responsibility to press for foreign policy and policies generally globally, which are more sensitive to the plight of the world's people.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference.
The road to hell was paved with good intentions. The grand vision emerged from the debris of the Second World War. The IMF and its development arm, the World Bank, were the twin pillars guiding the world into a new era of growth. The newly decolonizing nations were to fall within its warm embrace. New industries would be developed, lifting them out of dependency. Trade would be pushed, lifting them out of poverty.
And to create a foundation for lasting peace.
But as the disparity between rich and poor countries actually increased, the doubts and the anger grew. Some of the protesters were spoiling for a fight, but most were driven by a moral outrage at the inequalities of the world order, at a globalization process rigged against the weak, and by the refusal of the big powers to listen. The new man at the bank arrived in the mid-90s. To more caring Blairite and Clinton-esque tones, he abandoned structural adjustment and unveiled a poverty reduction strategy. He urged rich countries to support it, and with startling foresight, warned of the consequences if they didn't.
It's an issue of people coming in with a bomb or poison. Terrorism is something that is a new form of conflict, which can affect us wherever we are. And I believe that if you could have a more stable situation in the world, if you could have more equitable growth, then it's very much in our self-interest to make sure that that happens.
But it didn't happen, and the protests grew. Each international meeting brought promises and platitudes. Wolfenson called in the activists to discuss the policies, but he shut them out when he didn't like their conclusions. Genoa this July, the meeting of the Group of 8 wealthiest nations. 300,000 people on the streets. One protester dead. The last mass gathering of the anti-globalization movement. The violence may have grabbed the headlines, but what went unnoticed was the presence of a growing number of political activists from all over the developing world, including Ghana. They used every opportunity to tell the economic fundamentalists inside that their policies weren't working.
The big issue is debt, in as far as it has acted as a leverage for conditionalities to be put in place, such as structured adjustment programs, and within that measures like privatization of public assets, and now privatization of services and utilities like water, and then liberalization of agriculture, of markets, of trade, of interest rates that have direct impact on our productivity and our capacity to participate in the global process of developing our country.
Back in Accra, Helen Wangusa is on the trail of more evidence. She has a rendezvous in the central market with a particularly vulnerable set of workers.
We are with a young group of women from the north, dislocated from their traditional habitat. They are doing manual work. They are working as porters for only 15,000 cedis. And when you break that down into how much they need to spend and save, it really is very little. Can you describe for me a typical day's work?
I have 5 o'clock.
We get up at 5 a.m., arrive at the market at 7, and our mistress comes at about 7:30. We open the shop and set up the stalls, and when people start coming, we start carrying the goods. At about 4 p.m. we pack away the stalls. By the time we finish, it's 5 and we go home.
How many years did you spend at school?
I never went to school.
If you had a chance or a choice, what would you have liked to do?
If I'd gone to school, I know I would have found a better job. If I'd gone to school, I'd have loved to study dressmaking. I would have liked to acquire a skill.
How can the bank and the IMF understand poverty unless they come and get that understanding from the people? Because the understanding they have is from what they do the analysis on in the books by economists. That understanding is different from how the people define poverty. Poverty here is not only about people living below $1 a day. It's like those girls being isolated, being dislocated from their social habitat. It includes all that. It includes their dignity.
The terrorist strikes on New York and Washington shocked and horrified people here. Ghanaians are instinctively pro-American and pro-British. Religious tension is rare. Christians and Muslims live in harmony. But September the 11th was also seen as the culmination of frustrations that had been building up for some time.
I think we started seeing that even in the demonstrations in Genoa, there were peaceful demonstrations, but there were definitely sections of the demonstration that were very violent. That comes out of frustration of people from seeing institutions that started in a position where they knew everything, they knew how to address poverty, they knew what development was, and over 15 to 20 years, they haven't been able to deliver. And in some countries, people have been patient over 15 years waiting for this prosperity to yield, and it's not happening.
Radio is the most powerful medium in Ghana, and Vibe FM is one of the most influential stations. Its most popular phone-in is Point Blank. The program is hosted by Kwesi Pratt, a former political prisoner.
Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Point Blank. Today we are going to look at the whole concept of globalization.
These days the World Bank is trying to reinvent itself as the listening bank. The relationship has changed. Now it has to justify all its policies to a more questioning public. Today the structural adjustment program is being dissected, starting with all the conditions attached to the loans.
Conditionalities, I mean, they cover all sorts of different areas.
If you can just take the main ones, you know.
You name it, there have been, at various times, it has to be said, conditions in almost every sector.
But actually, I wanted to know what those conditions are.
Well, you know, they're not particularly secret, and they are. Sometimes, if you wanted...
You look quite uncomfortable talking about
No, I'll talk about conditions. Okay. No, it's just that there are so many of them.
Yeah.
These are the World Bank's new tactics. Concede the arguments in principle and promise change. But actually, on the ground, conditions are being applied with as much vigour as ever.
He thinks there is. Everybody thinks there is. But it's a theory.
It's in the IMF, you know, benchmark. It's in it.
There's a difference between a benchmark and a condition, but that's okay.
But why is a bank? But a benchmark is a condition.
Huh?
Why is the bank pushing it so hard?
Why? Because the Ghana Water Corporation has failed Ghana. The people. If anybody thinks, here's a challenge. If anybody thinks they get great service from Ghana Water Company, let them phone and praise this company. This company has failed Ghanaian society.
Well, Peter, can I ask the question? Can I ask the question? Yeah. Obviously, there are many people who think that your organization has failed the people of the third world.
That's true.
Should we just sell it off to some multinational corporation?
Good morning, and I'm Niama. Actually, I will want to get this thing directly to Mr. Peter Harold. I don't like the way he's trying to deceive everybody. Now, this is the issue, the IMF World Bank policies that come with the Structural Adjustment Program and the Economic Recovery Program actually adjust government policy away from public welfare to debt servicing. Now,
people know the detail now. They know how much has been spent on basic services and how much on debt. They're linking the local economy and global politics. This phone-in was 2 days after the attacks on America, but already callers were suggesting a connection between poverty and terrorism.
Now, can we stop pretending while the people are dying? What happened in America recently should give us a clue that it is not the people, it is not just about terrorism. Who created the terrorists? It is God Almighty didn't create anybody to become a terrorist. It is the system that is making the people so. You see what I'm talking about?
Yes,
so that
sir.
this kind of the chaos will continue, the armed robbery will continue, all these things will continue.
Well,
if this
thank you very
system
much.
is
Your
not
point
checked.
is well made, and thank you very much. Peter, quick reaction.
He's right, we agree, we've changed, and we are doing something about Africa's debt problem, so that problem of resources only going to service debt instead of education and health, etc., will not be the same in the future.
Frustration is growing. Reliance on gold and cocoa hasn't brought wealth to the people. Other industries are struggling, like textiles. Locally made clothes have given way to second-hand imports. This time, though, the bank says it really does have a plan for the poor. HIPC, the Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. For Ghana, just the name marks the final humiliation. Model pupil turned beggar. The bank promises its intentions are good, write off much of the debt and divert the money to basic services.
So if it's so desirable, if its only aim is purely to reduce poverty, yes, if it's simply providing countries with debt relief on a plate, why are so many Ghanaians against it?
There are people who were not enthusiastic about structural adjustment and believed it was just going to be more pain. That they couldn't believe that the World Bank and IMF were advocating a program that was actually going to relieve the country of debt. They couldn't believe that that would be the case, even though it is the case.
So it's too
good. It had to be a trick.
It was too good to be true.
Too good to be true.
Every country that underwent structural adjustment is mired in debt. Even the bank admits average incomes have failed to rise in 20 years. Is it surprising then that people no longer believe the grand promises for the future, given everything that's happened in the past?
Ghana moved from being the great black hope of structural adjustment, the shining star of the African continent, to becoming one more highly indebted poor country among 40 plus others. If anything, I think it's very clear that those who accuse the IMF and the World Bank of a market fundamentalism and also trying to impose a monoculture of economic models on people, they have been validated. When you ask the people from the bank and the fund to point you to one country where the model has worked, they begin to tell you that people have not carried on with the program enough. But they must show that in the real world, it doesn't happen as they preach it. If in the real world, nobody is able to follow their orthodoxy, is it people who are wrong, or what they are thinking in their heads which is wrong?
They admit it themselves. Their thinking was wrong. Economic fundamentalism has left hundreds of millions worse off than ever, and the world more unequal than ever. In these more unstable times, perhaps if only for self-preservation, the prophecies of doom will no longer be ignored.
For more information about tonight's programme, please visit our website at www.bbc.co.uk/correspondent. Next week, can men who've dedicated their lives to violent crime really change? In South Africa, we followed two convicted killers as they're released from prison to try to make a clean break with the past.